In 1941, at the height of the Second World War, the Pacific Ocean became a fiercely contested battleground, a theatre of conflict between the Allies and Axis powers. Soldiers, sailors, pilots, they leapt from island to island, disrupting each other's supply routes, strangling the lines of communication. There were 7 major naval battles, 3 major land battles, and continuous air combat. It all played out here, on the beaches and jungles of Guam, Samoa, Solomon Islands, New Guinea and Palau. Both sides used them as the staging grounds for their offensives. After several intense and bloody campaigns, the Allies emerged victorious. They dealt a devastating blow to the Axis powers and secured the islands for good. It's been 7 decades. These islands still bear the scars and stories of battle, but they enjoy a benign status on the geopolitical stage. Today, they're known for their pristine beaches, their exotic cuisines and cultural diversity. That is set to change. The Pacific is again turning into a battleground as China makes its moves. Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. China has set its eyes on Pacific Island nations. It's trying to increase its clout in the region. It's trying to woo these countries through every possible means, diplomatically, financially, even culturally. China has been doing this for the last 16 years. Only now the moves are becoming more brazen, more ambitious and more divisive. First things first, which nations are we talking about? These 8 island states that stretch across the South Pacific: Kiribati, Samoa, Fiji, Tonga, Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea and East Timor. At first glance, they may not look like a major geopolitical prize. These islands are sparsely populated, they lack natural resources, they're prone to volcanic eruptions, they witness frequent earthquakes, and yet for China, they've become the latest targets of expansionism. Why? Because of their location. These nations span over 15% of the world's surface. They have jurisdiction over an area of ocean which is 3 times as large as continental US. They have strategic sea lanes. 60% of the world's maritime trade passes through these islands. And this makes them one of the world's most important passageways for trade. Control on these islands would mean control on these trade routes, and that is what China wants. And that's just one reason. There are multiple others. Like a vast resource of fish, it's a very big deal. 1.4 million tons of tuna are caught in their waters every year. This accounts for more than 30% of the global market for tuna. The Chinese love this fish. They eat more than they produce. Where do they get the rest of the supply? By illegal fishing. In recent months, there have been numerous reports of Chinese fishing fleets. They unlawfully seize huge hauls of tuna in South Pacific. Such is the scale of their loot that the Quad had to unveil a plan to counter it, the Strategic Quadrilateral. They came up with a new plan to deal with China's illegal fishing. So what does China do? It tries to legalize its actions. It tries to pull these countries closer into its orbit, bind their economies and societies financially. This is Beijing's mission. In fact, they've been at it for quite some time. Since 2006, China's trade, aid, diplomatic and commercial activity in South Pacific has been steadily rising. During this period, there has been a 12-fold increase in the value of Chinese exports and imports to this region. This graph tells you the story. From being non-existent 20 years back, Chinese trade with Pacific Island countries has now surpassed that of Australia. China has also dramatically scaled up its aid activity in the region. Between 2006 and 2017, China provided close to $1.5 billion in foreign aid to Pacific Island countries. As of today, China is the 3rd largest donor to the Pacific. It contributes over 8% of foreign aid to this region. And the way China delivers this aid stands out. Most of it is done through grants, loans and infrastructure projects. China uses these projects as a vehicle to get its state-owned companies into the region, sort of like an entry ticket. In Suva, the capital of Fiji, the imprint of Chinese projects is unmistakable. In the heart of the city, a bridge has been rebuilt with Chinese loans. It has a Mandarin billboard hanging overhead. A short drive away, there's a shining new Chinese embassy. There's the WANGUO Friendship Plaza, a skeletal apartment tower built by a Chinese company. It was supposed to be South Pacific's tallest building. That was until Fiji halted construction over safety concerns. But the trend is clear. China wants to expand its footprint, and visibly so. In the Solomon Islands, China has built a national sports stadium to hold the Pacific Games. In Papua New Guinea, it is building roads worth $4 billion. In Vanuatu, it is developing the Malakula Island Highway. In Tonga, it is renovating the Tonga National Road. Look at the scale of these investments. And you could argue that this is good news for the Pacific. This region faces significant developmental gaps, and China is filling those gaps. But at what cost? At the cost of their sovereignty. All these investments are meant to give China greater influence over the Pacific. If there were any doubts about this, a recent agreement with the Solomon Islands settled them all. China is said to have signed a security deal with the Solomons. This deal gives China the power to send security forces to the islands. What for? To quell unrest and protect Chinese investments. Also to possibly build a port for military use. Chinese officials deny that's the plan, but a leaked draft of this deal has spilled the beans. It gives Beijing the right to send military personnel for, and I'm quoting, what for? Maintaining social order, protecting people's lives and property, and providing humanitarian assistance. And that's not all. Chinese ships and vessels can stop in the islands to carry out what they call logistical replenishment. What does that even mean? It means that China wants to send its soldiers and ships into another strategically important theater. China wants to extend its extraterritorial reach in the Pacific. And this policy is not new. In 2015, when concerns over Chinese investments in the South China Sea were growing, Xi Jinping visited the White House. He met then-President Barack Obama, and he said this about China's intentions. I'm quoting again, "Construction activities that China is undertaking in the Spratly Islands do not target or impact any country, and China does not intend to pursue militarization." That's what he said. You know what he did? China constructed ports, airstrips, and military installations all over the region. Today, Beijing has more than 27 military posts in the Spratly Islands. It has stationed jets and cruise missiles on woody islands. It has shored up its territorial claims on surrounding maritime areas. There's no reason to believe they won't repeat this in the South Pacific. Last month, China's foreign minister embarked on a tour to the region. He visited 8 countries in 10 days. In Fiji, he discussed a trade and security deal. In Kiribati, he signed MOUs on disaster prevention. In Samoa, he signed deals on exchange of technology. In Vanuatu, he signed pacts related to the Belt and Road Initiative. But this was the big headline, a Pacific snub. WONG went with a sweeping trade and security deal. The Pacific nations rejected it. China wanted to bind these nations in lopsided economic and security deals. In fact, they came with a pre-drafted deal, confident of having their way. Well, it was not to be. The leaked draft sent alarm bells ringing in Canberra, Wellington, and Washington. They went into an overdrive to counter China's moves. Australia was the first to act. It dispatched its new foreign minister to the Pacific, Penny Wong. She visited Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa. America is following suit. It is sending a presidential envoy to Marshall Islands. New Zealand, too, is responding. Later this month, its foreign minister will visit Pacific Islands. Now, what do these 3 countries fear? A Chinese military base in their sphere of influence. One that Beijing could use to monitor and patrol their activities and upset the strategic balance in the long run. You see, South Pacific was once America's turf. It built hospitals and airports there. It helped this area develop economically. But in recent years, the US has been MIA, missing in action. It has ignored this region because it has bigger fish to fry. And this has reduced American influence considerably. Washington woke up only when Beijing started casting its net here. The counter visits by US officials, the study papers on China's ambitions, the recent op-eds on Chinese expansionism, they're all proof of America's fear of losing its turf. So this is what it comes down to. China is challenging America in the South Pacific. A turf war, a battle for strategic supremacy has begun. Beijing has made some big strides. America and its allies are catching up. And this has the makings of another battleground.